Certainly, we discussed it earlier that it is kind of an old school, old fashioned, today's word would be a trad approach to raising kids. And it's really built on just the four cornerstones that I thought that every kid and every adult our age should have. And that was, focus on personal courtesy, developing confidence in daily life, resilience in adversity. And of course, the most important one for a child or children, developing ambition. And the parenting groove was always built around instilling in them those four virtues.
Jeff Nelligan is an involved parent. He's been an involved parent for over 3 decades now. He raised 3 boys who have gone on to have stellar careers and lives. What is the secret? Jeff and I talk about what goes into good parenting in this day and age, the role of omnipresent electronics, and some musings about the future. Nellie, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Certainly. First of all, it's a pleasure to be on the show because I love the ethos. Everyone hits a bump in the road, and it's whether they sustain themselves after that bump that provides really the true inspiration in life. So it's a privilege to be here. My story, I'm the father of 3 sons. All 3 are military officers. And the reason behind my actually, thankfully being on the show is I think that a bump in the road is the moment that anyone becomes a parent, even of a single child. I had 3 at the point, their mom and I, 3 almost back to back to back. And I think that provides a real shift in how one lives their life, whether they've been professionally focused or even self-focused. But the arrival of a newborn and then another really provides that bump in the road to say that from this moment on, that path is going to be, vastly different than it was.
Talk a little bit about some of your philosophy on parenting, because your book is, I think, almost a how-to manual for raising self-motivated, responsible young people.
Certainly, we discussed it earlier that it is kind of an old school, old fashioned, today's word would be a trad approach to raising kids. And it's really built on just the four cornerstones that I thought that every kid and every adult our age should have. And that was, focus on personal courtesy, developing confidence in daily life, resilience in adversity. And of course, the most important one for a child or children, developing ambition. And the parenting groove was always built around instilling in them those 4 virtues. And in the book, it often took the format of just giving them tests and having a strategy so that even at 4 and 5 years old, they were held accountable not only for things, but were also given independence to do things that would gain them that confidence and resilience in later life. I don't think, I'll tell you, the bump in the road, maybe, to use that metaphor, here's a bump in the road for parents. 75% of the time you spend with your child is over by the time that kid turns 12 years old. And 90% of the time you spend with him is over by the age of 18. So the idea is you must get to a child very, very young in order to develop those qualities, that they have a reflex in handling the day-to-day mechanics of life.
We were talking before we came on about where you and I are around the same age, I think. And
yes.
We were talking about some of the differences between more traditional child rearing and what we're seeing in some of the younger generations. What are some of the things you think that account for some of the things we're seeing in, is it Gen Z?
Yes. The Gen Z, let's say, cohort begins 1996, ends 2012. That's the general recognized span of time. And there's not an adult, and there's probably not someone above the age of 35 who doesn't have a Gen Z anecdotal story about about choose your quality: diffidence, indifference, laziness, lack of follow through, just impoliteness. And yet, because all of these fit into the idea of building a kid who is one of character, so that none of those traits are very visible at any one time. But anyone over 35, that's a litany of talking about that Gen Z cohort of people. But behind the anecdotes, and we spoke of this earlier, are the real numbers. And 42% of school-age children and adolescents have at least one chronic health condition.
Mm.
1/3 of Gen Z admits to feel persistent and hopeless and depressed feelings. 58% of hiring managers say that the grads that appear to them, 21, 22, are not prepared for the job. 65% of those hiring managers say the hiring of a Gen Z results within less than 1 year of firing that Gen Z. And here always is my favorite, Pat. 28% of Gen Z coming to a first interview with a hiring manager bring their parents.
You're kidding.
No.
Why?
Well, I guess if you're not strong a character, you need mom right next to you to say to the hiring manager, sometimes Junior takes out the garbage and does the dinner dishes, right? I mean, it's an unbelievable stat, but underneath it is that idea of a generation that really, really hasn't hit or grasped civic and social virtues and just behaviors.
And some basic skills. I mean, look at Harvard. They're now offering remedial math.
Yes.
That's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is. And if, education in general, this is that we talked about this earlier, education in general is always in constant conflict with what we call the glowing rectangle, the absolute addiction of youth to screens. The average time spent on a digital device, mostly an iPhone, by a teen 10 to 18 during a typical day is 8 hours and 47 minutes. That doesn't include schoolwork. Now, if you've got a kid on a phone or on a screen for 9 hours a day, you've got a problem, because that kid is in a passive mode and is subject to all the vulgarity or maybe non-vulgarity of the interweb coming at them. The communication all done by screens and by keyboards. And of course, you're not enough of that. And a generation raised like that, that's why 60% of them are going to be fired from their first job, and nearly 1 out of 3 of them bring their parent to an interview.
That is stunning. I've noticed in myself, with this online world, that you have to guard against going down all those rabbit holes. It can be fun for a little bit, but you have to limit your time. I mean, I found that my concentration was waning, and that I wasn't as productive as I would like, or as creative as I would like. So I limited the time, online. I limited the time I even read in the morning. I go through really quickly to see what's going on in the world. That is it. And by virtue of the podcast, plus my predilection for reading, I read several books a week, which helps enormously because it helps retain your ability to focus and go deep. But I have seen it in myself, and I'm aware of this.
Yeah.
I can't imagine growing up and this is your norm.
Right. This is your norm. Well, This is a norm. Kids between the ages of 3 and 5 are on a screen approximately 97 minutes every day, 3 to 5 years old. I mean, what parent is handing their kid a screen who's 4 years old? That's a parent who's become disengaged.
Yeah.
That's a parent who has also one of these things in their hand constantly. So, as I say, we can talk about Gen Z and we can talk about this generation of kids this age. And, you and I, again, we're about the same age, we have all the anecdotes that are too funny to believe. But then you see the numbers, 45% of 18 to 32-year-olds live at home. I mean, this is not just anecdotes anymore. This is a genuine crisis. And Dr. Jonathan Haidt, within the last, 10 months, published which is very, very famous book called Anxious Generation, which documents in detail the rise of social media and the social, mental, and physical problems that have accompanied it with this generation. Of course, it's called Anxious Generation because that's what that generation predominantly is.
It almost sounds like it needs a generational detox.
Oh,
Seriously.
yes.
Yep.
And there are ways to do it. One of the big things on my website is my social media contracts, which I've gathered from different very, very erudite sources, that are a contract in which you sit down with your kid one day and you say, it's going to be a new day beginning tomorrow because this family cannot continue on with all of us staring at screens. And then it slowly, the purpose is to diminish slowly the amount of time a kid has a device, as well as the parent. And at the same time, there's penalties. You go over an hour a day on that phone, and I'm taking it away for a week. We're not going to have phones in the car. We're not going to have phones at the dinner table or any other table. And by the way, Junior, I'm turning the router off in the house at 7:30. So I'm going to shut you down completely. So it's only that kind of dramatic shock treatment that can move us away from such statistics that I've just listed out here.
Well, I think in addition, there's an interpersonal dimension that's lost. Sherry Turkle, I think her name is, up at MIT, has made it a point of studying the impact of these social media devices that we have on our lives. And she did a TED Talk, I'm going to say at least 10 years ago.
Wow.
And in that TED Talk, she told a story of a young man that came up to her after she gave a lecture. And he said, I would like to learn how to have a conversation, but not today.
Yes, not today.
So does screen time substitute for interpersonal time?
No question. And indeed, that was one of the main drivers behind the Jonathan Haidt book, was that kids have become just unable to actually socialize for long periods of time, which of course is reflected in those workplace statistics, that I gave you. 58% of the hiring managers say the kids are unprepared for the workforce. 61% say grads are frequently and almost always late for work or late for meetings. It's that socialization process that you get when you have to deal with people on a regular basis. One of the things my kids growing up, they didn't get a phone until they were at the end of 11th grade.
Wow.
And then when they got them, I made a deal. I said, I'll give you $5 a day to the kid who comes home with the most charge in their phone. And so my kids, and even today, have no social media accounts. And of course, my kids are the ultimate social animals because they have to lead men and women in every corner of the planet, on ships and on the ground. So, and I'm not holding my kids up as some kind of avatar of greatness or goodness. I'm just saying I've seen what we've spoken about happen with all the kids around me. When you've been around kids and their parents for 3 decades, you tend to pick up a lot of things.
How can you start to develop a kid who's going to be a leader? What are some of the things that kids can be doing to develop those skills?
That's a super question, because you can do that. I always go back to, you thrust responsibility upon them at a young age. And it fits into some of the stories in my book. You give them tasks or assign them things to do that really stretch them in every way. And here's a perfect example. One of the first things I ever did with my kids was we were in a big crowded shopping mall in Washington, D.C., indoor on a Saturday, just chaos, mobs and noise. And the four of us were standing there, and I took out my wallet and I gave each kid a $5 bill. And I said, "Hey guys, go get the old man change." I said, "It's not a race. Don't worry about that, but you got to come back with change. And I'll be standing right here." And the eldest was 7 and the youngest was 4, and off they went. Now, yeah, I kept an eye on the 4-year-old and the other 2 a little bit, but the idea was they were on their own. They were thrust into a situation they'd never seen before, and they performed. And from that small start, everything builds. The next time you go into a 7-Eleven in a sketchy area of town and say, "Hey, Junior, here's a $20 bill. Go get us Doritos and Gatorades and beef jerky, and we'll be sitting right in the car in the parking lot." And the kid has to get out of the car and go do it. Or sitting at a restaurant, "Hey, youngest guy, you're 5 years old. You need to memorize all of our orders and tell the waiter what we want."
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Or at an airport, "Here's all the paperwork, guy. You're 7 years old. We need 5 boarding passes, so just go get them for us." So if you continually test your kids and give them that responsibility, so what happens is they build confidence as almost a reflex, as muscle memory, and that leadership starts to assert itself in every year of their life. And so suddenly the 4-year-old in the mall going to get $5 and change, who comes back with a quarter full of a pocket full of quarters, he's the guy at 24 who's standing on the bridge of a guided missile destroyer in the Persian Gulf at midnight, surrounded by Iranian mines and gunboats. And the captain of the ship points to him and says, you're the officer of the deck right now, because you've taken on so much responsibility, accrued it over so much time, that you naturally have that confidence that others recognize. So that's how it plays out in the end. And that's, I think, the way you build that leadership.
What role does sports have in all this? Because all your kids were very active in sports. Yeah,
great question, Pat. And it's something, most parents are familiar with, because I would say between 60 and 70% of kids always start on a soccer field at the age of 4, kicking a ball around and chasing butterflies at the same time. Sports is a great leveler at a young age. When you're 4 or 5 years old, you're about as good as anyone else on that field. So it gives you that chance to either rise or just maintain. But the great thing about sports is, and it fits into every venue of life, whether, like your Wall Street experience or, experience after that, there's 3 things you get from it, from any sport. Number one, you get camaraderie. You're on a team, and you may not even like some of the people on the team, but you have to get along because you're all moving towards a goal. The second thing is it's personal discipline. Unless you're comfortable sitting on the bench game after game, you're going to push yourself to get better so that you're on the field. And the third thing is adversity. I love sports because there's such a finality to it. At the end of the game, there's a winner and a loser. And if you get too complacent with being on that losing side, that's not a good harbinger for how things are going to be. But I will say sports is an overused metaphor, because you could use the theater, you could use the marching band, you could use the robotics club, the scouts, any volunteer event, any type of organization that brings like-minded kids together in pursuit of a goal. So yes, sports is good. You get more of the physical, aspect of it. But all those other endeavors, they still build that, solid, character-driven kid.
And that leads to the idea of physical fitness, which has just been left by the wayside by society.
And it wasn't helped by COVID. And, we're talking now at least a quarter of kids from, pretty much 3 to 18, a quarter, 25% are obese or overweight. Now, let me tell you, if you're obese or overweight at 14, you're not dropping it.
It's going to be
And
hard.
yeah, it's going to be climbing the Matterhorn. And the converse is over 18 to 80 in this country. The numbers are 42% obese and 31% overweight. You've got over 7 out of 10 adults in this country that are obese or overweight, and you've got a quarter, and it's moving up every year, of kids obese, overweight. That's the physical aspect you talk about. And let me tell you, to shed weight is so difficult for people. And it just affects every aspect of your life, including your mental health.
No, I think so too. And I think, the whole weight issue also goes to, I was reading something the other day. I wish I remembered the exact numbers, but they were saying that the majority of people prefer fast food delivered to their doorstep as opposed to actually cooking a meal.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a large segment of our population that just doesn't connect with the depth, the nutritional value, and the social value of food.
Right. I know. And it's obviously evident in the statistics that that I just cited, because you eat enough of that, that's what you end up becoming. There's a reason in 1990, 9% of people in the United States were obese. And now we're looking, we're approaching 45%. Now, how did you get, 36% jump in obesity in 30 years? Just what you've said. People ordering fast food to their doors.
Well, and we're divorced from our food sources. And I think that we don't have any really nutritional education, which I think is important. I don't know that we had it at our age, but when we were younger, but the world was so much different then. I mean, we had cleaner sources of food. They were much more local. It was a very different world. Today, I am stunned when I eat a very low glycemic, real food, mostly organic diet. Okay. I am
Good for
stunned.
you.
Well, it was an evolution in my
Yeah.
life, but I am stunned when I go into a supermarket and I see all these aisles
Oh,
of essentially fake food.
yeah.
It just stuns
Packaged and
me.
preserved. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember being in Whole Foods one day, which is not the cheapest place in the world to shop, and this woman ahead of me had this cart stacked full of prepared foods. And I
Wow.
thought, "Why are you shopping at Whole Foods
Why are you at Whole Foods?
for all this?" But, I don't, I hope some of this renewed interest in health is real. How do we integrate it into our daily lives? How do we start to really spread this word in a meaningful way for people when they're young?
Yeah. Again, it always comes back. Virtually all of life comes back to that idea of parent engagement. And a checked out parent, or a parent, or both parents, assumes then that the culture is going to raise the kid. And there's not a reasonable person on this planet who thinks the culture raising the kid is a good thing. And, then I go back to the first stat I gave you, 75% is up by 12. So you've got to get that parent engagement early. And that's responsibility of being a parent. And that parent also, as you've noted, has to be the one that says, we're going to have to eat a certain way. And it's always amazing to me that the parents with kids who are, heavy set or whatever, can't see what that's going to do to that kid down the line, in so many different facets of life.
No, I think it's a huge issue, but checked out parents, I think parents are more stressed than ever. Um, as a society, we don't encourage presence.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem because if you can't be present with your own life, you can't be present to your child's life, which
Yeah.
means that you're just missing everything's just going right by you.
Right. And your idea of presence, I mean, I like that term because that's exactly what this takes away.
Yes.
I mean, it's passive. Indeed, it's counterintuitive. It's almost sucking the life out of you because it's doing all the work and you're doing none. It's also too that presence you talk about, I think, and this is my personal view, and so it may not fit in with all the viewers, but this this society is overcome with self-obsession
Oh my God.
and self inward. Even the term I hear all the time, self-care. And it's bad enough hearing it from someone who's 21 and single, but when you hear it from someone who's 45 with kids, you just it's laughable. It's as though it's someone is conducting a parody of themselves. So that self-obsession cuts into that that lack of presence, and we pay the price. I gave you the stats of just one generation, and what that's done to them. And again, turning around those stats, those statistics, is going to be the work of a leviathan.
What's up for the next generation after Gen Z?
Oh my gosh, there's already a name given to it. It's called Alpha, Gen Alpha. Almost beginning the cycle again from Generation X, and then Y skipped over in kind of in homage to the millennium, so they became millennials, entering the new millennium, and Z became just the way to close it out. Alpha, just more of the same. I think the self-obsession, the addiction to electronics, the emergence of AI and what that does. Again, I've said it before, the self-obsession. I think that's just become such a critical part of people's lives. And, also too, in general, a theme that seems to come through. And I think it goes to what you said about presence, victimology.
Oh my God.
And I think that really has played a role with Gen Z. We're victims. We grew up with, the environmental, catastrophes and COVID and this erratic economy. And, so that's almost become the victimization of everybody who, has a heartbeat in that generation. Whereas, as I said before, weak people make excuses, strong people prevail. And if you see yourself as a victim at the age of 21, you're doomed, because to shake that off is going to take quite the shock treatment, and it's no way to live.
No, it's no way to live at all. And oh, that's just sad to even think about that.
Yeah.
I'll go back to what you said about AI. AI is such an interesting innovation that's just permeating society. I think there are places for it. I can sort of think of it at this stage as super search, really, more than anything.
Yes.
But I think that it is making people lazy in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
For example, I can put a book into Adobe and get a synopsis before I have a guest on my show. That's I don't do it purposely because unless it's a book I really don't want to read.
Yeah.
But I make it a point to read a book, to at least skim it, to go through it. Not only am I curious and interested, but somebody's taken all this effort to write a book. Give them the courtesy of just a simple courtesy of reading it.
Pat sounds very trad there, very old school.
There's a lot to be said for a little courtesy in the world.
Yeah. I like the way you put it too, super search. I know AI because I was part of a beta for a big public relations firm here in DC, using AI. Kind of the AI group teamed against real human beings in putting together a massive, massive, like a 10-state communications plan for a Fortune 30 corporation, and the AI team versus the other one, and the time it took and the quality of product that was produced. And it took us, the AI team, once the go, we got all the documents. I'm talking blogs, PowerPoint presentations, hundreds of tweets, speeches, graphics, position papers, fact sheets, vast volume of documents in about 6 minutes.
Oh my.
The team of 4 other PR people, had barely turned on their computers. Now we had to go through all that with what I call the 80-20. I always tell my kids, just get the ball 80 yards down the field. We'll take care of the other 20 yards somehow. We had to go through those documents to ensure their viability, but that maybe took another 2 hours. So what you've done there is we crushed, 6 different people in a matter of 2 hours, 2.5 hours. It would have taken them days and weeks. So when you say AI, you're right. It's the super search and the super production.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you tell those, 6 PR people that one guy did or 2 people did with an AI machine? Where's their future? Well, their future is working at the AutoZone and the giant supermarket. That's what it's ultimately going to be. It's harsh, but that's what we've got to, because your example is another perfect example of what it can do.
Well, it's changing a lot of things. I think about somebody who, say, goes to medical school, becomes a doctor.
Oh.
I mean, their training is so obsolete. It's like memorizing a phone book. Really having that information at your fingertips with AI, I think, would be enormously useful, and yet hopefully doesn't totally remove the human component.
Right. And that's the balance you'll have to find. But in so many white collar jobs, you could, like this one, like putting together a communications plan for a Fortune 30 company in 10 states. Those bodies aren't needed anymore. All they're needed to do is do a double check of the AI product. And, that tough future is not quite here yet, but it's getting here.
It's getting here really fast. What is the solution for keeping human engagement as part of the equation?
Boy, I'd be on Wall Street if I knew the answer to that. Gosh.
It brings up, though, an interesting question of an absolute revolution in education and the way we approach learning. Because if all that information is readily available and you don't have to memorize things anymore, and that's fine, memorization, it can be just a little tedious, but where do you develop that muscle memory in your profession that clicks in when things fall apart? AI can't do that.
Right. I've thought about that a lot, because, every other article in any educational literature is about kids using AI,
Mm-hmm.
and professors at a loss to try and detect it and then to punish it. And so kids who are using it are not getting that full, well, you put it perfectly. They're not getting that full volume that you would get out of reading a book,
Mm-hmm.
a guest's book, versus putting it into an AI machine and getting the summary. They're not getting that. So that's affecting their own character, their own development as a human being. And then we come back to what you asked about earlier, leadership. I want someone who's done the reading. I don't want someone who's used a machine. And that's how you'll separate the leaders. At one point, this society is going to just need leaders, because everything else ultimately, and this is maybe 20 or 30 years down the line, will be taken over by machines, and you'll just need leaders to lead smaller cohort groups of people. And so that's what you want to develop.
Yeah, and I think when you develop your own skills, you own them. So when you show up at any job, do the best you can, or any task, because you will own that, and at some point in the future, it'll come back to you.
Right.
But So
Right.
the skills you're talking about looking into the future are softer skills in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, there will always be a need for, STEM majors, engineers,
Yeah.
mathematicians, physics. Forget history majors, sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists. Those majors were already archaic 20 years ago. They're absolutely prehistoric right now. And so to complement all the science types you're going to need the leaders, the people that a company wants to hire. I mean, you can already see it in the way companies hire kids out of college. One of the great things a company looks for is, for example, a kid who's played 4 years of a sport,
Mhm.
whether it's D3 or D1. They know they have a team player. They know someone that he's going to grind, and that he's probably got somewhat of a personality to do that. So those boundaries, those categories and parameters will just get more acute as these classes and time moves on.
Though I would argue that AI is gonna impact engineers and people like that as
Well, it
well.
will. Yeah,
Yeah.
it will. Yeah. Again, I think, yeah, they will. And just like you said, doctors, but there'll still be a need for them. People with just hard skills. Actually, I think you used that term. Hard knowledge.
Yeah, it's an interesting world that we're moving into. You know, these are really hard truths that you're bringing up. How
Yeah.
do you use these sorts of hard truths to start molding children now?
All about a strategy, Pat. It's a strategy starting early. And like I said, you people rely on anecdotes. You just look at the numbers. You've got 75% of your life is over at age 12. So you've got to start it early. And if you do that with a strategy for, everyone has a strategy for losing weight or lifting weights or their professional career or the way their home operates, their house operates on a monthly basis. Why not have a strategy for your kids? That should be your number one strategy, because they just don't evolve and become 18-year-olds. There's a process you can put them through, and different markers that you can set, so that as they get older and older, that they've hit these markers. And most important, the markers they hit will sustain them. Like the 4 values in my book: courtesy and confidence and resilience to adversity and ambition. You hit those markers and the kid's got a good sense of those at an early age, he's going to be okay when he's 35 and you're long gone.